Good afternoon and welcome to Celtic State of Mind. My name is Laura Bradburn and you are joining us for the Acsom Friday Bulletin. Today we see the return of Brian Degnan. How you doing, Brian?
I'm top draw. I'm sunning myself in the southwest of England. Absolutely roasting. Looking forward to finishing work and getting straight to the pub, if I'm honest with you. That's as direct and straight honest as I can. That's my Friday plan.
We will try and expedite that process as much as we can by getting this show on the road. Joined by another Celtic fan from down south, Alan from Celtic by Numbers. How you doing, Alan?
Yeah, similarly, a bit of a puddle at the moment, but I do like Brian's plan. It's simple, it's achievable, it's measurable, and I'm reckon he's going to smash it.
To be fair, simple's an accusation that's levelled at me quite a lot.
All about context, Brian. All about context. Tosh Tokoglu Junior Malone says, late today, you might notice we are not in our usual 12:30 time slot. It is a 2 p.m. start for us today, and that is all due to the fact that John Yogi Hughes was laid to rest at St Mary's in the Calton today. I believe the mass is perhaps still just finishing at the moment, and there will be a procession past Celtic Park on a glorious day to send them off, it has to be said. Alan, always important to celebrate these big figures in Celtic history, isn't it? And give them the send-off that they deserve.
Yeah, a guy who lived the dream, and nearly 500 games for Celtic, 189 goals, 17 trophies. I mean, what a career! I mean, the career we'd all give a lot for, right? If we could live through that. I know John had a few regrets in terms of he missed the 67 final, but was a key member of the team that got to that final. And also, the 70 final, he was the centre forward. But that's the nature of an alpha male competitive, that he remembers those things. But let's celebrate all the wonderful achievements and wonderful things he achieved for Celtic. And at the end of the day, more importantly, from all of what I've read and seen from friends and family, just a lovely, warm person, and that's what will be remembered.
Yeah, Brian, it's clear from the way that his family have remembered him and the open arms they've given to Celtic fans to be involved in remembering him, that Celtic meant a lot to John Hughes as much as John Hughes meaning a lot to Celtic. And being part of that Lisbon Lion team, even though he never played in the final on the day in Lisbon, it just shows what Celtic fans make of those historical figures, that he's as fondly remembered as anybody in that starting lineup.
Absolutely, and it's not just a loss for Celtic and for Scottish football, it's a loss for football because, as much as it's important to us as Celtic fans, the Lisbon Lions and their journey is one of the best fairy tale stories in sporting history. So it's appropriate that he's remembered so fondly. Although he didn't play in the final, but he's been part of that run-up. One of the things I like best, I saw one of the quotes from the service, and it was Yogi's son, and he said he was talking about how his dad wanted to be remembered, and he said he didn't just want to be remembered for one goal or for one game. He wanted to be known that he was a Celtic man. For Dad, being remembered as a Celtic man was the greatest imaginable honour, and I think that's kind of beautiful. And I think it's immensely sad when any family member loses another, but I think for his family to look at the turnout and the love for the man, I think it's got to go somewhere, a sort of celebrating his life and getting through today. So yeah, massive loss, and it's always sad when these things happen.
Yeah, a massive loss to football, but as we said, an even more massive loss to his family, and our thoughts are with them today. And as things go on, because as we all know, it's easy to keep yourself busy in these situations when jobs have to be done, things have to be organised. But it's after today that they'll really need everybody's thoughts and support. So thoughts go out to them, and we will do what we are always here to do and talk Celtic, as I'm sure he did enjoy doing. So we'll move on to current day topics. One thing I wanted to talk about before we got on to Celtic's current team and performances and things like that. Brian, I'll come to you on this first. Couldn't help but notice the stories around Kieran Tierney potentially moving to Manchester City. And before everybody gets on my back and says he's gone, talk about current Celtic players. It does apply to the current Celtic team at the moment, because there is a suggestion that we are still likely to financially benefit from any move of Kieran Tierney's. There's talk of a £50 million fee for him to Manchester City, and I'm sure Celtic would be due no small part of that because of our role in his development. I guess the question I've got to ask about that, Brian, is how much of a part of Celtic's growth and their ongoing planning should it be that something like that is written into most players' contracts when they leave? Like, how important are fees like this going to be to help and sustain the club going forward?
Well, I think any income to the club is always going to be important, especially for a club the size of Celtic. And I think the sell-on fee was maybe 10%, so you're talking 5 million potentially, which is well, it's nearly a Jota, isn't it?
Yeah, good way to measure it. I like that.
Nearly a Jota. And I think what the interesting thing is it just represents good business, because if you look at the performances of Kieran down south, even the 25 million he went for, it looks like a steal. And I know it's hard to talk about Scottish football having value when you look at the performance of Dundee United last night in the bigger stage, but I think how we value players is incredibly important. And I think the fact that he went for 25, he's probably going to go for 50 to Man City shows that if we produce players, and the model we've been trying to stick with for so long is develop players, sell them on. But you want to always have that inclusion, that because they're going, even if you sell them on from Celtic to another club in Europe or the Premier League, you're going to get a decent amount of money. But if you sell on again, the sell-on fee could nearly, maybe about a quarter or a third of the initial fee. Look at Van Dijk that he went for initially, and then when Liverpool paid for him from Southampton, it's crazy. So I think it's smart business from Celtic. I think it's something we should always be doing, and I think probably the way we've went about our business recently with the sort of extended contracts and things like that, and the loans with the option to buys, I think we have been a bit cleverer, a bit more canny with how we go about our business. So, and Kieran Tierney's a club legend. They always will be. And I think that, people were down on him when he left. And I wish him all the best. I think he's a great guy. He's a great example of, someone who come through the ranks, and fair play to him. I think I've been enjoying the Arsenal documentary on Amazon now.
Oh, yes.
So for some reason, I sort of love Arteta and Arsenal all of a sudden, but that'll fade after about 3 days. But despite my newfound fondness for them, I really hope that he goes to bigger and better things, because I think he's more than capable. Yeah,
I really hope so as well. And I have to say, if Pep Guardiola pulled off in a sense a part exchange of Zinchenko for Kieran Tierney, I think he would be pulling a masterstroke off there, because I know who'd be getting the upgrade. But Alan, it's a as Brian says, it's good business, but it's not something that I think I previously considered as a key part of our business and a key part of how we've financed the club going forward. But as time's going on and we're seeing players come through and potentially go for these bigger fees, do you think is it a reliable form of income for us, or is it going to be in just in cases like Kieran Tierney, who's a kind of once in a generation talent?
Well, I think it will be something we have to build in. I don't think it's income you want to bank on, but it's something we should certainly plan for. I mean, contracts are becoming increasingly more complicated. There doesn't seem to be any sky limit. I use that pun deliberately in terms of the fees that English clubs certainly are willing to pay for players. So I think especially when you're selling to English clubs. I think the money that we got for Van Dijk almost increased by 50% based on the sell-on fee. So that's an incredible piece of business. So yes, it is hugely important that we do it. Now with Kieran Tierney, I'm not sure if there is a sell-on clause or not. Do we know that for sure?
It's being rumoured to be the case. I don't have anything specific, but where did I get this from? Glasgow Live was the source that I got, that there could be a potential sell-on fee, so yeah.
No, the reason I'm a little bit doubtful is because I believe when Celtic sold Tierney, what was very unusual about that deal was they managed to secure, I think, virtually all of the 25 million up front, which is quite unusual. Normally fees are split into 3 chunks, 40 40, 30, 30 over 3 years or 3 windows even, and it just eases cash flow for clubs, and virtually every transfer does that. So I think the benefit to Celtic was in getting the 25 million up front. I would have been surprised if in addition there was a sell-on fee, but I'm happy to be corrected on that one. But one thing to realise is that Celtic, for every time Kieran Tierney moves clubs, Celtic will always get a percentage of that deal under FIFA regulations anyway, all the way down to, I think, any club that he had a contract with will get some kickback from any transfer fee. That's just the way football transfers work now. It's all part of FIFA regulations to try and distribute some of the wealth. So there'll always be an element of that anyway. But no, absolutely, it has to be a key model, and especially when we're dealing with English clubs because of just the insanity of the market there.
Yeah, just to clarify that, for anybody who wants to see, it's Ben Banks for Glasgow Live who wrote Celtic in the mega money Tierney sell-on clause that could make them millions, and later on in the passage he does say, when moving south in a £25 million deal from Celtic, the Hoops inserted a 15% sell-on clause into the deal. Now, I don't know where he's got that information from, but going by his hopeful journalistic integrity, he's got that from a source somewhere that he feels confident to put it in. So, like you said, Alan, the fact that we got the money up front that we did get, it does surprise but please me if there is also a 15% sell-on clause there that we can rely on. So we remain to see if that's the case. Thanks everybody for commenting and watching. Just make sure that you keep commenting wherever you're watching: Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube, obviously. So just a couple of comments coming in about Yogi. Joe Hamilton says, farewell Yogi, absolute legend of a man. Rest in peace Yogi, from Michael Ross. And an interesting one there from Pete McGee, who says Yogi wasn't just a legend, he was a totally unique one, which I think everybody agrees with. Tosh Cogley Malone says, where is Jim? If you're familiar with Jim's timetable from last season, he'll be keeping that up this season. He does a bi-weekly show, so he was on last week, he'll be on next week, and that'll be the way he's proceeding with the going forward. But listen to us here while he's not here, and I'm sure we'll talk even a little bit of sense in comparison to Jim, hopefully, and see how we go on with that. We'll move on to looking at Liel Abada was another thing we thought we would discuss. Obviously, he scored a vital goal against Ross County last week to kind of secure the victory. That third goal, it was an outstanding goal, and he seems to be providing a lot of impact coming off the bench. I guess the question I have, and Alan, I'll come to you on this first and see if you can hopefully provide us any stats to prove me right or otherwise, but there's a bit of me that thinks that he might be a useful option going straight in from the starting lineup, even though he has been so effective off the bench. Does that usually follow through with players, or and in his case, do you think he would be a suitable option from the start? Or are you quite happy with him being used in the fashion that he's been used at the moment?
Yeah, so a couple of things there to kind of unpack. So first the sort of issue of players coming off the bench versus starting. So I've actually been doing a bit of work on this very topic this week.
Excellent.
And
I thought I would chance it there, but
we probably wouldn't have done that because the article's not out yet. So that wasn't staged, ladies and gentlemen. That was genuinely a surprise. So it'll be on the Celtic Way, I think, either today or tomorrow. And then I read a really interesting piece, and I'm sorry I can't credit the person on Twitter, one of the sort of analysts that I follow, making the point that actually, I'm sorry this is getting a little bit technical in a data sense, but just bear with me. What we normally do is we measure all data on a per 90-minute basis, and that equalizes out the fact that some players play full games, some players come on as subs, some players get taken off, etc. So if you add up all their minutes, divide it by 90, and then look at their stats and work it out on how many on a 90-minute basis, you can normalize all that out and everyone's on a level playing field. But actually what this article was saying is it's not a level playing field. And the reason for that is that if you play, generally speaking, goals, the chance of a goal being scored goes up the further a match goes on. Because if you think about it logically, teams get tired, etc. Space opens up and so forth. So goals increasingly are scored in the second half of games and increasingly towards the end of the game. So actually, if you're always coming on as a substitute, you've actually got a better chance of scoring than if you'd started the game. And I think. Okay. Yeah, so I think that's a really important point for people to remember when they say, "Oh, we should drop Kyogo and we should drop Maeda because they haven't scored against Ross County. It's like, well, yeah, but they did run them ragged for 60 minutes, and then the others came on and had a bit of space to work in. You got to think of it in those sort of terms. So in terms of Abada is actually one of the players who does really well when he comes on and off the bench. In fact, most of Postecoglou's signings have got a better expected goals and a better expected assist rates when they come on as a sub than they do when they start. And if you think about it, that's logical. It's not surprising. It's not saying they're better off the bench. It's just the fact that Celtic, in particular, because of the financial strength they have relative to the league, can bring on very strong players off the bench late in games, and I think we'll see this season. We've already seen 75-minute get goal against Aberdeen to sort of kill that off, and then 2 goals in the last 10 minutes against Ross County. Teams can set up really well, can be really well organised, but when you're bringing quality players off the bench and you can bring 5 of them, you can essentially replace half your outfield players, then it's very difficult for teams to defend that when there's such a quality gap. So to answer you, come back to Abada, I don't particularly think that he's any more or less effective coming off the bench, but the stats might say he is for the reasons that I've said. But what I do continue to be surprised about is that people don't understand the value that he brings, because his performance numbers are actually very spectacular. And he's probably one of the top 5 attacking talents for his age in Europe. He's for a 20-year-old. There's not many 20-year-olds play for a club like Celtic, to be honest. And his underlying numbers were, in fact, his expected goals and assists were fractionally higher than Jota's last season. Okay. Now, where I think there's a perception bias that kicks in with Abada versus, for example, Jota, because it's an interesting counterpoint, is that Jota's one of these players that gets on the ball a lot. He tries a lot of crosses, a lot of runs, and a lot of shots, and the total volume of all his output is mightily impressive, even if the average per event isn't necessarily that high. Whereas Abada, I think there's 2 things about Abada that I think colour people's perceptions of him. One is the fact that he doesn't get on the ball nearly as much as Jota does, and the second is that he does some things quite badly that we traditionally would want a winger to do well, and that's counterintuitive to us. So, he's not great at taking a player on. His crossing is a little bit spotty, but the way he counters this, and I would recommend. I'm actually quoting here from an article that Duco James did in the Celtic Way a couple of days ago. Okay, he did an excellent piece on Abada, so I recommend you look at that. Is that when Abada does get into a good position and he does have a successful cross, or he does have a shot, it tends to be of very high quality. So what he does well, he does really, really well. And some of the things he does badly, you sort of think, well, I expect a winger to be good at that. So I think for those reasons, people sort of look at Abada and go, oh, he's a bit inconsistent and so forth. But in totality, his underlying numbers are no worse than Jota's actually. And in fact, in domestic games, I would argue he's probably more effective than Maeda, because his attacking output is so much greater. Where again, and this is a point that James made, so I'm not going to take credit for this, but what his opinion, which I would agree with, is that if you look at Europe and you see Maeda's got much more effective pressing and defensive statistics, you could argue that actually you're better to play a player like Maeda in European games than you would the likes of Abada, who's defensively not as strong. So a lot to unpack there, but that would be my thoughts. And as I say, I've borrowed a lot there from James. I'll hold my hand up there, but I do agree with the points he made, because they were well researched.
Yeah, some interesting points there. Pete McGee says he thinks Abada has been underrated by a lot of people, and he thinks he's near top class and will only get better as he matures. Brian, it's a difficult thing to get your head around, especially if he is only making fleeting appearances here and there, but even if he does have a great impact when he comes on. What's your opinion on Abada and his current sort of place in the team? Do you think he deserves more time on the pitch, more delivery of the ball? Because I do think, to pick up on what Alan said, not only does Jota see more of the ball, I think we focus more of our play through Jota, so it's perhaps why he sees more of the ball. What do you think of Abada? Should we be appreciating him more? Should they be getting more time on the pitch?
Well, I think they should be appreciating him. I think he's an excellent talent, and I think Al said it right in the head there. I think he's not the traditional winger. and neither's Maeda, and that's why the dynamic with Jota is really interesting. You know, I won't stoke up the Jota left or Jota right argument again, but you can see depending, you've always got this kind of traditional winger, and then Abada or traditional winger in Maeda. What I think is important is I don't think Ange has starters and subs. I think he has the sort of squad, and I think there'll be a certain amount of games Abada's going to start, there'll be a certain amount of Maeda's going to start. I think it'll be fairly evenly rotated, to be honest. I don't think he's got like a strongest 11 necessarily. I think there's probably like a core that are undroppable. So I think like CCV, Cal McGregor, Jota, they're certainly the undroppables. I think they're hard to replace. Yeah. Everyone else I think will rotate throughout the season. So I think you see plenty of Abada starting. And again, as I've said, I think there'll be times where, I mean, if you're a defender and you've had Maeda chasing you and harrying you, and you've been trying to run after Kyogo for 60 minutes, and Ed Abada comes on, his pace and his directness, it's not a conversation you want to have, you know. Flip that, and if you've got Giakoumakis starting, and he's battering defenders for an hour, and then Kyogo comes on, and they need to start chasing him, that's a nightmare as well. So I almost think the sort of starters versus subs argument, I don't think it holds much water, because I think that throughout the season, they're leaving itself out, because I don't think Ange sees it that way. And see, apart from the sort of 3 or 4 I mentioned as being key, I think most other players in the squad will rotate.
Yeah, Mal McCann on YouTube's commenting exactly the same. Abada will get plenty of time with the amount of games coming up, as will most of the squad. So it's I guess to come back to you, Alan, on that one, I think what Brian's saying there, as well as what you were saying about altering our expectations and our view of what a winger does, maybe we need to alter our expectations and our view of what the squad is and what a lineup is, because as Brian says, we've got a manager who is fostering a squad mentality and not necessarily a mentality that says this is my strongest 11 and the rest of you come in to replace them when required.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I'm trying to coach myself to be an experienced Ange watcher, and what I feel is that he won't make changes to the lineup if he doesn't have to, or doesn't feel that it's justified. So in the current situation where we've got 1 game a week, I don't expect to see many changes in the starting lineup, assuming everyone's playing well. He's not going to rotate people for the sheer hell of it, I don't believe. He'll always play as what he thinks is the strongest team in that sense, or and not just change people just because to give somebody a game. Because the way he would look at it is that a week of training with no interruption for travelling and playing a game midweek means that everyone's getting plenty of intensity into the legs anyway. So I wouldn't expect many changes in injuries. Obviously, being the major factor. When we get into playing 2 games a week and we start playing in the Champions League, then I think it might be a little bit different. It might be a little bit more nuanced, some of the formations that we play. But yeah, he's not. Long story short, right? I don't believe he's a tinkerer.
I don't believe so either. He certainly seems to know his own mind and goes with it, and it'll be interesting to see. Brian, just before we move on to the next topic, what do you make of what Alan said there and what he was picking up from James about the Maeda discussion? Do you think there's an argument to say that maybe if he's defensively stronger, we should go with him in Europe and Abada domestically, or where do you stand on that particular argument?
Yeah, I think it seems pretty clear, right? Because it's the same reason I think that Giakoumakis will score more goals than Kyogo this season. It's because I think Kyogo is going to feature more in Europe against the sort of harder teams, whereas I think Giakoumakis will play more domestically, and then by extension be facing sort of weaker defences. And I think the reason for that is, in Maeda, it's the same. It's that pressing and that pace, because as well as Maeda being able to defend for the front, he's also great to have in the counter-attack because he's so fast. And I think Hugo's the exact same. So I think that's spot on, actually. That's what I would do if I was in charge. Not that I would be, but if I was in charge, I would expect that sort of defensive front 3 who can also counter-attack efficiently. Whereas domestically, you don't need to worry about that quite as much.
Do you expect that to go hand in hand with a change in shape in Europe, given that we've only seen him play one system so far?
I don't think... So I think there's a real distinction between like system, tactics, and approach.
Okay.
I don't think they're all mutually exclusive. I don't think if he decides to play a 3-5-2, that's altering the system in any way. I think the system is still high press, sort of counter pressing, attacking, etc. So I don't think a formation change negates a system change.
Okay.
And I think his approach to any game is going to be the same. I think he may pick the team slightly differently depending on the opposition. But I don't think, again, he's going to change his approach, and I don't think the system changes. I don't see why he would change the formation, if I'm honest. It seems to sort of fit how he's always been. You could maybe imagine he goes 4-3. But again, if you take any snapshot throughout a game, how many times is everyone actually in a 4-3-3 sort of standard shape? It's very staggered. It's a lot interchanging. It does move around a lot. So I think the system versus tactics argument is sort of different. I don't think that it's a 4-4-2, 4-3-3, whatever. I don't think it really affects how we'll play or the way we'll play. So I don't imagine you've changed that for Europe is the sort of short answer.
Yeah. Alan, you touched on it just before I asked Brian about that, expecting maybe to see some slight changes. Are you talking more in terms of shape for that or approach to the game, given the distinction Brian was making between tactics and system there?
Yeah, no, I think I was nodding away to myself there with everything Brian was saying. Very astute in terms of I wouldn't get too hung up on. I mean, clearly, if you're going to go to a back three, that's a very different way of setting up, and I don't think we're going to do that. Would we change intrinsic approach? No, right? He's going to go after teams, be on the front foot, try and attack them, try and press them, etc. That isn't going to change. Any changes as such will be quite subtle ones, as we've seen, and he has made. It might be that you play somebody like an Aaron Moy in there with McGregor just to get a little bit more control on the game, possibly. Mm-hmm. But then again, possibly not. I think it would be interesting. I think you probably will pick Maeda if he's fit, simply because of his ability to press, and to put in the number of sprints and pressures and counter pressures that he does. And at that level, that's going to be quite key. So I think it'll be those sort of considerations, those slight little adjustments. It won't be anything fundamental. It certainly won't be changing, parking the bus or dropping into a narrow 4-4-2 or anything like that. No way. I mean, I think Postecoglou is very much of the sort of Bielsa school. If what we're doing is failing, we're not doing it well enough. We need to try harder.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that, and we'll come back to Moy in a wee minute, because I know, Brian, you've got something you wanted to ask Alan from a statistical point of view to see if it goes with your eye test. So we'll come back to that.
You made that sound like you were setting up a proposal there.
I don't even know where to take that one, to be honest, so we'll just move on swiftly. But thanks everybody for commenting and everything. I forgot to say at the start of the show, please like and subscribe on the channel, like the video and subscribe on the channel, because it really helps us get out there. We've seen quite a big upturn in subscribers, and I think if we haven't already passed it, we're very fast approaching 20,000 subscribers, which is insane. So thank you to everybody who's already done that, and if you haven't, it costs you nothing, and it's just a click of a button and you'll get notified every time we go live. So that would really be appreciated by everybody who's involved with the podcast. Brian, I'll move over to you then. The Aaron Moy question is something that you brought up, but you were mentioning before we came on air that the perception of him and the way you feel he is as a midfielder is two slightly different things. Yeah,
so I saw a bit of, I'm not going to go back to this question, is a good signing or not. I saw people getting quite excited about that, but people seem to think he's cover for McGregor and he's going to play that sort of deeper role. And so if you look at a rotation, so say you get McGregor, Hatate, O'Reilly, then the second would be Turnbull, say Gucci and Moy. And I don't see Moy as that sort of, I mean, he could maybe play a pivot, but I don't see him as that number 6. Certainly not as cover for McGregor. And I'm just curious where Al sees him. And if he agrees with me and he doesn't see them sitting there, how essential is it? Do we get someone to replace McGregor? Because for me, there's no one in the squad can do what McGregor can do, especially in that role. I think McCarthy's decent as a sort of ball winner and spoiler, but that doesn't fit our team, although it's the same position. Gucci, I've not seen enough about. So far, I kind of say I'm hugely impressed. So I'm just wondering, does Moy fit there? And if he doesn't, what's your thoughts on that position?
Yeah, and interesting question, Alan. Just because I think we've all been crying out for a central defensive midfielder, and I think some supporters, out of, I don't know whether it's desperation or anything, at the fact we might not get one in, are trying to slot different midfielders that we have into that position. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts, as Brian says, on how suitable any of our midfield choices, but more specifically, are for that, or whether you think we need somebody who's more specialist in that role to come in.
Yeah, I mean, listen, and I've not seen a huge amount of Aaron Moy, but looking at his kind of career to date, he's played as a number 6, and this is according to Transfer Market, who track player positions over their careers. I don't know how accurate it is, but he's played roughly sort of 26 matches in his career as a defensive midfielder, and that's really, you're talking a game here, a game there over his whole career. I think 7 games in the A-League about 10 years ago is the most in any one season, according to this, that he played as a number 6. So it's easily less than 10% of his time. So to me, in terms of his career, he's a number 8, right? And he has been a number 8. He's not. You wouldn't classify him as a 10 in terms of right up behind the striker. He's more of a sort of box to box type, midfielder in that sense. And if you look at his defensive stats across his career, and I'm sort of referring to FBref here, which use StatsBomb data, the number his defensive actions are predominantly in the middle third and in the opponent's final third, not in the defensive third. So there's no evidence historically in his career he does a lot of action, has a lot of activity in that defensive third. So long story short, he's what are his strengths? His strengths are his range of passing, really, is his biggest strength. So I think that he's a different type of number 8 than probably what we've got in that sense. I think I suspect he was probably seen as a safe option by Postecoglou, somebody he knew what the strengths and weaknesses were, and it was a body just to fill out the squad. I suspect because he's not had a club for a little while that it'll take a while for him to get up to speed. And so we won't see a lot of him in the short term, I don't think. And so therefore my conclusion is that we still have a massive risk that if McGregor gets injured, we really do have nobody that can really fill that role on an equal basis. Because as you rightly said, McCarthy is excellent as a purely defensive destroyer. He's probably the best at simply doing that specific set of things very well in the Celtic squad, but he's nowhere close to being the type of midfielder that I think Postecoglou needs in that system and using the approach that we have. So big gap, and I think my understanding is we're still looking. I think we're looking for 2 more. One being a defensive mid, and one being someone that can probably play quite flexibly across the front. So hopefully that will happen.
Just when you mentioned StatsBomb there, I thought you were talking about the messages you put in the group chat whenever any of us are watching a game and mentioned something that we noticed, only for you to go on and prove that we didn't know what we were talking about.
Keep you right. Yeah, keep you right. Yeah.
It's fascinating stuff. I just always love the contrast between the perception of players and then what you find when you look at the data, and obviously one informs the other, but it's just always fascinating to talk about. Brian, I guess to take on board what Alan said there about Aaron Moy, does that inform you a little bit more on what you see his role being in the team going forward this season? Do you think he's got a major role to play, or will he be a kind of stopgap filler to finish out games the way he has been the first few games of the season?
I suspect he's probably someone that can sort of stabilise the midfield a little bit. As I say, he's different from the other midfielders we've got, but he's still a very, very good passer of the ball. And I think he's a good player to have. I think he's a no-risk signing. And Postecoglou knows what he's going to get from him. I don't imagine him start often, but you don't need that. I think he's the type of player who can go and control games. So it'll be interesting. I think that they needed cover for Hatate and O'Reilly. Sorry. I think Turnbull and Moy, while different players, do provide creative options off the bench that they have. So I think it's a good signing, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of him.
Yeah, no, I think he might be. I think Who's News agrees with you. Says his first game looked a bit shaky. Second game never made a mistake. More decisive, nice touch on the ball, and moved it into feet quickly. And I don't think you can ever complain about what what some people might describe as a tidy footballer. Sometimes it's used a bit disparagingly, but I think in the case of Celtic, it's something we've not had enough of, and can certainly help us see out games. We'll go on to talking about the Ross County game in a second and look ahead to obviously the next game at the weekend, which I believe, if I just double check, that is Kilmarnock at Rugby Park on Sunday at 12 o'clock. So, but before we do that, Juranović, and I'll come to you on this, Brian, the transfer talk about Juranović is not going away. This time it's Man United that has been linked with him. Why he would want to go to that circus of a club at the moment, I'm not entirely sure. I can only imagine there's one reason you would go to Man United at the moment, and it's got something to do with the colour green in a slightly different way. But yeah, he's been linked with a move to Old Trafford, and obviously has been linked with moves to other significant clubs in Europe over the summer, and yet here we are in August, 2 games into the season, and still have him. I guess the question I want to ask you, Brian, is do you think we can hold on to him? And if so, do you think it's a good thing for Celtic to hold on to him in the meantime?
So it depends on the player. If the player wants to go, he's going to go. And I think Postecoglou, I don't think he'll make any attempt to hold on to him if he tells him he's going to go. I think he's been quite clear. I can't remember where the quote came from, but he basically said they were asking about keeping players happy, and he says, well, they're at Celtic. If they're not happy to be Celtic, they can find someone else and be happy. So I don't imagine if Juranović knocks on his door and says, Gaffer, I want to leave, that he'll block it. So depending on the player. So this is where me and Al have been getting on quite well today. He's sort of backed up points I've made, which is always nice to be vindicated. But this is probably where he rinses me for being an idiot. But I don't think, and this is testament to Ralston, but I don't think there's a huge drop off in quality from Juranović to Ralston at this stage. I actually think, if we could get, so I saw 15 million quoted, and I've got an issue with that, which we can come to in a second. But if we were to lose him, get a good chunk of money in, and find another right back, I would still be confident that if Ralston starts the game, I'll be fairly happy. I think Juranović is a better player. I think he's better at a lot of things. I think he's much better interceptor of the ball for what I've seen. But I do think Ralston's got really good qualities, and I think he's a very good crosser. Maybe a bit inconsistent, but when he gets it right, it's good. So I don't think there's a massive drop-off. And if we could offer something in the region of 20-25 million, which for a Croatian international at 26 years old, who's about to play in the Champions League, and a 4-year deal is not a lot of money to ask for, especially if it's a Man United who paid 85 million for Harry Maguire. I think we can be confident of getting a lot more than 15 million. And if we get something in the 20 plus mark, I think we would take it, especially if the player wants to go. So I'll over to you to rinse me for
before I do that, and before he rinses you, I'm going to say you've got at least one supporter. Stevie Boy says with Ralston playing as well as he is, if they brought in another right back, I can see he's selling JJ for megabucks, which I presume was the disparaging remark you made about the 15 million. And as an aside, by the way, I could do a whole podcast on this. Harry Maguire is the worst professional football I've ever seen in my life, but we'll talk about that another time. Alan, what do you make of what Brian said there about Juranović? Because I have to say, I'm of the opinion that I don't think he's completely irreplaceable either. But I would think for his career and for the benefit of Celtic at least, because the World Cup is at Christmas, it might behoove both of us if he stays at Celtic until Christmas, until the Qatar World Cup's out of the way and maybe moves on in January. But to go back to the point that Brian made, is he a particularly irreplaceable player for you, or do you think there's an ability to send him on without losing too much?
Yeah, nobody's irreplaceable. It's that simple.
True.
Really not. So just a wee quick one on Harry Maguire. So because I live in Sheffield, I do go and see Sheffield United sometimes, and I watched Harry Maguire when Blades were in League One, and I just thought he's a big unit. He heads the ball away, but that was about it. To be honest, I can absolutely astonished the trajectory his career took. But anyway, sorry to get back to your point. Listen, I'm going to disappoint Brian a little bit in the sense that I'm not. I just think he's absolutely spot on. Actually, so one of the challenges that I've had and actually is I can normally and have normally been able to articulate through data a player's strengths and weaknesses relative to each other. What I've found almost impossible is to articulate why Juranović is a better player than Ralston.
Okay.
Because I just don't have the data evidence to back that up.
This is what it feels like to be the rest of us, Alan. This is what it's like.
But there's a but. There is a but. I've started. There's a couple of new bits. Again, I don't want to get too into the weeds in this, but there's a couple of metrics that I've started collecting around. And Brian hit the nail on the head when he mentioned interceptions. I think the main difference between Ralston and Juranović is Juranovic's ability to probably just read the game a little bit quicker and to react physically a little bit quicker. He just moves across the ground quicker. Ralston's not the most agile player physically. And I think Juranovic's ability, as Brian said, to intercept, to turn over the ball and force turnovers through closing down that little bit quicker, I think that's the differentiator. Because if you look at all of the other stats, especially Ralston's a far more creative fullback, far more creative. He's far better at crossing. His expected assist rate and actual assists far, far stronger. Even his ability to pass the ball through the lines is far better than Juranović. He's more of a goal threat from open play than Juranović. And defensively, there really isn't a lot between them in terms of the defensive metrics. So it's one of the big challenges to me is to work out why would Juranović be considered, a sort of a big star, big name, and Ralston be kind of looked down upon, because I just can't see it in the data at all. Right.
I think if he was called Ralstovich, it might be a different.
So I'm still not convinced Ralston, scales well against European level opposition, if I'm honest, and it does come down to that basic pace. I think that's true in both fullback positions. So if we did sell Juranović, and let's be honest, 26 going on 27, if we get optimal price for him, then we should cash in. That's the model. That has to be the model, and providing we can go out and get a sensible alternative to replace him with, because the price that Celtic should be asking for defenders is now being set by the likes of, if you look at Doig's move, if you look at Calvin Ramsey's move, you look at Calvin Bassey's move, the benchmark for the cost of SPFL defenders has gone up and up and up. So we should be asking a significant amount of money for Juranović. He's got a long contract, etc., and he's moving into his prime years. So to me, he would be a very valuable asset, but it's not one that I would be devastated. And providing we recruited carefully, and thus far Postecoglou's record seems quite good, I'd be hopeful we'll be able to replace him quite effectively.
Yeah, try as you might, Brian, you can't get Alan to disagree with you today.
What a Friday this is to
You're talking far too much sense, but I have to pull you both up. Paddy Lavery's not happy. He says, are Alan and Brian both wearing blue tops in a Celtic podcast? I don't even know. Is that a blue top, Alan? I don't even know. You could have got away with that.
It's very, very dark blue. It's.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one, Paddy, because any dark top can hide a multitude of sins.
Amen to that. Yeah, no, I'll go with that. We'll move on to just before we look at the game against Kilmarnock at the weekend. Alan, I'll come back to you to start with on Ross County. I came in for a bit of stick last week on the post-match coverage for saying that I thought the 3-1 victory, or the 3-1 scoreline, I should say, flattered us a bit. Now, I did think we deserved to probably win the match, but I thought that Ross County held their own for the majority of the match and were maybe unlucky to suffer as heavy a defeat as they did. Now, the methods they went about doing that are up for discussion, certainly, but they certainly gave us a bit of a tough time. How did the stats and things reflect that for you? Was it as close a match as I maybe felt it was, or was it a little bit more decisive than that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I remember, or at least trying to watch the game as best as I could, not being too kind of concerned, because we were creating chances. That's really what it comes down to. If we're creating chances and we're missing them, I'm not too worried. If we're not creating chances, then I tend to get really concerned. And actually, this was yet another game. If you look at expected goals, I had it at Celtic around about 2.68 and Ross County about 0.31. So that's a 2.3 expected goal difference. Now, based on Celtic's run over the last year, and what we now, how many games is it now? 34, 33, 34, undefeated. What has been a real feature of that run is the consistency that we've achieved and the gap between the quality of the chances we're giving up versus the quality of the chances that we're creating. And we're in this nice little spot where we are habitually about 1.5 to 2 xG better than the opposition in every game. And if you do that in every game, you might lose one. You always have a bad day. Things can happen in football, etc. But you're reducing variance quite considerably by creating that many more chances, or quality chances, than the opposition. So I wasn't concerned for that reason. I could see that we were creating the chances. And the second is just to come back to that point about substitutes. I mean, if you're bringing on those quality of substitutes against Ross County, they must be, tearing the hair out. Because what we've seen is, even with Aberdeen on the first day, I thought both Aberdeen and Ross County did a really good job at containing Celtic. I thought they were both well organised, well disciplined sides. I think they'll both have good seasons in the SPFL. But what they couldn't cope with is being harassed and harassed and harassed for 60, 70 minutes. Then you bring the subs on. And it's almost when you get the ball, it's like you're too tired to think what to do with it. And it's that aspect. That's why Celtic have still not conceded a goal, conceded one goal beyond the 70th minute in that 34-match run. One goal beyond the 70th minute, and that was Dylan Levitt's 35-yarder into the top corner, which does happen sometimes, right? For Dundee United on the day that we clinched the title. And I think the reason for that is just because the intensity that the starting 11 put into it, the other team, and then you add in the 5 subs, which I think is, I honestly think like the 5 sub thing is just going to make it far more difficult for the rest of the league to beat the top 2. It's just going to make it really, really hard. So I'm not sure it's a good thing for the competitiveness of the league, frankly. But we got to live with what we've got.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Obviously, the more resources you have to build a bigger squad, you're going to be able to take advantage of that if you're Celtic or Rangers compared to the other players. Brian, before I ask you about Ross County, I've just realised that the strap says why Celtic must keep Josip Juranović. I think it's pretty obvious to everybody watching that neither of the three of us came up with that strap. That was Paul John. So if we're roundly sacked by the end of this podcast, you'll know why. But he obviously disagrees with us on Juranović. But I hope to see him here until at least January anyway. But Brian, Ross County, I think the phrase "it was a hard watch" comes into mind, especially regarding the first half. Do you expect to see a lot of that going forward this season? A lot of teams treating us the way Ross County treated us, or even worse, kind of parking the bus in a way that makes it very, very difficult for us to break them down?
I do expect it, but I kind of disagree in terms of the performance, because I think it was a low block. I didn't really feel we were in danger at any point. I thought it was total domination. It was just, it's that thing with Celtic, and you're almost looking for things to complain about. I think, no, you personally, I just mean in general Celtic fans, because I think we can be a wee bit wasteful with chances. As I'll say, we're creating them so often, and I think if you look at, so we're playing a really stubborn defence, low block, sitting in tight. This time last season when we caught against that, it was a draw or a defeat at Livingston. Remember?
Mm-hmm.
We've improved that side of things, and then even if you saw it, as time went on, teams were still doing the same thing, sitting in, trying to get us kind of rough house tactics to try and disrupt the play and stuff like that. I think we know what we're up against, and I think we just keep playing our game till it happens. And the thing about it is, when you're in a low block and you can't get out, you're still getting tired because you're still having to mark that movement. When you look at, Hatate, Maeda and Taylor on that left, who are you marking there if you're there right back? I mean, you're all over the place. So even within them sitting back, they're going to get tired, they're going to lose concentration, and when they make mistakes to give the ball away, it's deadly for them. And given the fact, as Al said, I do agree with the 5 subs, by the way, I'm not a fan, but we can bring on 5 players of quality and then start it all over again. So as soon as we start even drop off, get a bit tired, or maybe lack a bit of creativity, change half the team and go again for the last half hour. So I think, to be honest, I think I only saw the first half. I think it was the same as the rest of the country. I only saw the first half of the Ross County game, but I thought we were total control. The frustration that I would normally get watching a team us against the low block wasn't there, because I had the faith that actually at some point we get one thing and we're going to score. And with the guys we've got, I mean, everybody knows I absolutely love Jota, I love O'Reilly, and I think the guys is creative with that. Come up with something special. You've got the movement of Kyogo. I mean, he took the goal exceptionally well. So, you know, I have to slightly disagree. I thought we were in total control, and frustration didn't really kick in for me. Don't get me wrong, if it's 89 minutes against Kilmarnock and it's nothing each, I maybe start yelling at the screen. But as it is, I'm pretty comfortable, and I think we know what we have to do to break that.
Yeah, Laura, sorry, Laura, to interrupt. Just one other point, which doesn't often affect professional football, is that I'm involved in a lot with grassroots football. When it's a windy day, it has a massive impact on the game for the kids, even older kids, 15, 16, etc. But in professional football, wind usually doesn't impact the game too much, but it did on Saturday for me, because what was happening, especially in the first half, was that if Livingston got anything on a clearance, a header, any sort of clearance, which was literally going the length of the pitch, and you were having to start back again with Joe Hart, and then you couldn't play any ball with any height on it forward. It was just like a beach ball in the wind sort of thing. I mean, there was actually one moment when Celtic almost scored because their keeper misjudged a high ball and it landed behind him, sort of thing. So it can impact the defence, but less so when you're playing that low block. So I do feel a little bit mitigating some of the quality of the play. I think the wind had a massive say on proceeding. I mean, it does spoil football in general, wind. So I wouldn't normally say that, but I think on that particular day it did have a huge impact.
I can vouch for the fact that wind spoils football if you've ever had a pie at half-time at Celtic Park, but we'll not go down that road. Speaking of pies, actually, what a segue, by the way. We're going back to Rugby Park. Thank you. That wasn't even on purpose, but I'll take it. Back to Rugby Park tomorrow, Sunday, for the return of Kilmarnock, who have come back up from the Championship. Brian, I'll come to you first. I wouldn't want to say a bogey ground for us, but it's certainly one that we do struggle from time to time, regardless of the standard of the Kilmarnock team. Do you have any concerns about going back there, or is it one of these things that just as a football fan it gets in your head and you actually need to rid yourself of it? Where are you standing? Is there any apprehension about going back to Rugby Park for you?
I suppose the only thing would be they're still using the plastic pitch, aren't they? And that's probably the concern, because you're always worried about injuries on that pitch. Interestingly, with Derek McInnes, I think he's actually a decent sort of SPFL manager, but maybe I'm wrong here, but I'm sure he tries to man mark Celtic and it's never successful. Like Aberdeen, they never really done anything against us, and I think trying to man mark this Celtic team is it reminds me of the story of Barry Robson trying to mark Messi. Who played Barcelona, and Gordon Strachan was saying, "Get tighter," and he was going, "How?" And I just get the feeling it won't be to that extreme, but I just don't. If they try and do the man marking thing, I don't think it works. I don't think it'll work for them against us. But we don't know, and you can't be arrogant because you're going to come across a banana skin at some point. But on paper, I can't see any major issues other than the plastic pitch for me. And I say that I'm saying that without being cocky and trying to give Kilmarnock the respect they deserve, but I can't see any major roadblocks.
Yeah, it's a strange one, because psychologically, I would not have any concerns going to the newly promoted team in the Scottish top flight, but with it never having been Kilmarnock to my memory before, and this being the first time I can remember them being the newly promoted side, it takes on a slightly different sort of outlook for me. Alan, the plastic pitch thing's an interesting point that Brian makes. That and any other issues you think we might face at Rugby Park, or do you think it's something that if we stick to our game it should be relatively routine for us?
It's only plastic, mate.
You got him finally, Brian. He's
Well, seriously, that will be the attitude. It won't be mentioned. I'd be astonished if the boss even mentions the plastic pitch.
Yeah.
He's not one for making excuses before the game. He won't be thinking about it. They've got artificial pitches at Lennox Town to train on and practice on. I'm sure they're very well versed in playing on them. There's absolutely no evidence Celtic's results are worse on plastic pitches than they are on grass. And that's going back over years, done that analysis. So no, that's not an excuse, and it's not something that I'm worried about. And I completely agree with Brian. McInnes historically will try to go man-to-man against Celtic, and I'm absolutely excited about the prospect of Polworth, Donnelly and Power going man-to-man against our midfield. That will be hilarious if that's the road he goes down, which makes me think he's not that stupid, McInnes. I'm pretty sure he won't try and do that, because that would be madness if he went down that route.
Yeah.
So listen, I think it's, we know what we're going to get from Celtic. We're not going to do anything special or different because it's Kilmarnock. Kilmarnock have had I suppose a decent start. I think they hung on reasonably well at Ibrox. They got a draw, salvaged the late draw against Dundee United in their first game. They've got a healthy smattering of very experienced individuals. Ash Taylor's in the team. I mentioned Power, Polworth. They've got Lafferty, the lad Shaw. You listen, these are all big, tall, powerful players. So it's going to be free kicks and corners. That's going to be the main concern, really. I don't know that they've got anyone that's good at putting a cross in the box. I'm just sort of looking at their lineup. There's a couple of names I don't know, but to be fair, that looks to me as if they've got a lot of heft and not a lot of craft. But I remain to be educated on their strengths, because obviously I haven't seen them for a season.
A lot of heft and not a lot of craft. You sound like my PE teacher, Alan.
I am not following that one up.
That's awful. Love that.
With that said, I think we'll leave it there. We will be back on Sunday for the match coverage, as always, a 12 o'clock kickoff, a little bit more reasonable time this weekend. Not sure who'll be sharing the match coverage, but there will certainly be coverage from the channel on the weekend. Brian, Alan, it's been a pleasure today, as always. Get down that pub, get a few drinks in you, and stay hydrated on this hottest of days. Thanks very much, everybody, and see you again very soon.